When we moved to Pinecrest Gardens, I feared my wife's disability would make us targets, but I never anticipated the chain of events that would unfold when the HOA president decided to chain her wheelchair to our porch. Deborah Morgan didn't realize that a phone call from Sarah would bring the governor to our doorsteps. The moment they discovered that the disabled woman they'd been harassing was about to challenge the very laws they had been abusing, things would change forever. I was in the middle of unpacking our kitchen boxes when the sharp sound of knocking, 3 quick, firm raps, startled me. We had only been in our new home for 4 days and weren't expecting anyone. Opening the door, I saw a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a bright red blazer standing on our porch. Her smile felt forced, and her handshake was stiff. "Hello, I'm Deborah Morgan, president of the Pinecrest Gardens Homeowners Association." She introduced herself, thrusting a hand with perfectly polished nails matching the red of her blazer. "You must be Mr. Taylor?" I shook her hand. That's right, James Taylor was still getting settled. Deborah gave our half-unpacked living room a quick glance before responding. "I can see that." "I won't take up much of your time. I'm here to officially welcome you to the community and to have you sign up for the HOA. She pulled a thick folder from her designer tote bag and offered it to me. When I didn't immediately accept it, her smile faltered. "These are the membership papers. All homeowners in Pinecrest Gardens must join the HOA. It's mandatory." I frowned. Mandatory? Our realtor never mentioned anything about an HOA. There was nothing in our closing documents. Deborah's smile tightened, her gaze now cold. "It's a recent change, voted on by the board last month. The monthly fee is $350. $350! I couldn't hide my surprise. That seems steep. "It covers landscaping, community events, and property value protection," she explained. "Our neighborhood has the highest property values in the county due to our strict standards." Just then, I heard the soft whir of Sarah's wheelchair as she rolled up behind me. "James, who's here?" Sarah asked, appearing in the doorway. Her long brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, her face tired but curious. "This is Deborah Morgan from the HOA. She says we need to join," I explained. Deborah's eyes immediately dropped to Sarah's wheelchair, scanning it briefly before looking back at Sarah's legs, covered by a light blanket despite the warm weather. "Nice to meet you," Sarah said with a warm smile. "We're excited to be here. The single-level layout and wide doorways are perfect for my needs." Deborah's gaze shifted again, this time focused on the small ramp we'd installed over the single step by the front door. "About that," she said, her tone slow and deliberate. "Any exterior modifications require pre-approval from the architectural committee. I don't see any approval forms for this ramp. We installed it yesterday so Sarah could enter and exit safely," I explained. "You'll need to submit formal paperwork," Deborah replied, pulling out yet another form. "The committee meets monthly. And speaking of modifications," she added, eyeing our mailbox and the house numbers. "I see your mailbox isn't the standard model, and the house numbers aren't the approved size or font." Sarah's smile faltered. "We haven't had time to replace those yet." "I understand," Deborah said, her voice lacking any warmth. "But we have standards here. That's why our community looks so pristine." My stomach tightened. We were on a fixed income, and with Sarah's medical expenses, an extra $350 a month would stretch us thin. Deborah's expression hardened. "Rules are rules, Mr. Taylor. I'm afraid there are no exceptions." "Can I review these documents first?" I asked, finally taking the folder. "Of course," she said, her smile returning, but it was anything but friendly. "You have 1 week to submit your application and fees." As she turned to leave, her eyes lingered on Sarah's wheelchair ramp. "Make sure you submit the approval paperwork for the ramp. We wouldn't want to issue a violation notice to new neighbors." After Deborah left, Sarah wheeled back into the living room, her expression intense. Well, that was something. I flipped through the thick folder of HOA regulations, barely able to believe the demands. $350 a month, and so many rules. From the type of plants we could grow, to the exact shades of paint allowed. "Maybe it won't be so bad," Sarah said optimistically. always trying to see the good in things. I wasn't so sure. Something about Deborah's reaction to Sarah's wheelchair had unsettled me. I'd chosen this house because it was easily modifiable for Sarah's needs, especially as her multiple sclerosis progressed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Deborah's veiled threats and the way she eyed Sarah's wheelchair kept running through my mind. At 2 a.m., I got up and searched online for more information about Pinecrest Gardens HOA. I found an article from 6 months earlier. Pinecrest Gardens residents challenged new HOA formation. It mentioned several homeowners who protested the creation of the HOA, claiming they hadn't agreed to it when purchasing their homes. I dug deeper and found a community forum full of complaints about the HOA's sudden rule changes and aggressive enforcement. One post stood out. They targeted Mrs. Wilson, that sweet 80-year-old widow, until she couldn't take it anymore and sold her house for way under market value. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Had we moved into a neighborhood ruled by a power-hungry HOA president? How could an HOA suddenly become mandatory for homes that had been purchased before it even existed? I printed out everything I found and spent hours the next day reading through county records online. The HOA had only been registered 9 months ago after many homes, including ours, had been purchased. By morning, I had a stack of printouts and a growing sense of dread. At breakfast, I showed Sarah what I'd found. "James, this is concerning," she said as she reviewed the documents. They can't force homeowners who bought before the HOA existed to join. That's what I thought. I'm calling our realtor and the title company today. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Her optimism always calmed me, but as I watched her struggle slightly to maneuver her wheelchair around our kitchen island, a space we had planned to modify for better accessibility, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to face a series of battles we weren't prepared for. A week later, Deborah Morgan returned, this time in a navy suit. When I told her we wouldn't be joining the HOA, her smile vanished. "I've consulted with our realtor and a property lawyer," I explained calmly. "Since the HOA formed after we bought our house, we can't be compelled to join." Deborah flushed with anger. "I think you'll find that's incorrect," she said, before turning and walking away. As she left, I saw her taking pictures of our front yard. "What are you doing?" I called out. "Documenting the non-conforming ramp and unapproved landscaping," she said without looking up. "The board will need to see this." Days later, a notice arrived under our windshield wiper claiming that our car was improperly parked in our own driveway. Sarah shook her head. "This is silly. We're not breaking any rules." I tossed it into the trash. They're just trying to intimidate us. But the next morning, another notice appeared, this time on our front door. It was a violation for the unapproved wheelchair ramp. 2 days later, we received a letter informing us they were fining us $100 per day for the ramp. I couldn't believe it. They can't do this. We don't belong to their HOA. That afternoon, I called a local property lawyer who confirmed that the HOA couldn't force us to join, nor could they fine us for modifications related to Sarah's disability. Armed with this information, I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board demanding they stop the harassment. I sent it by certified mail to ensure they couldn't claim they never received it. The very next day, I heard a truck outside. I looked out the window and saw 2 men in landscaping uniforms standing in our front yard. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "We were hired by the HOA," the older man replied, barely glancing at me. "Your lawn exceeds the height restriction by 1/4 inch." I was furious. "I didn't authorize this. Get off my property. We're not part of the HOA." The men left, but not before one muttered, "Good luck in this neighborhood, buddy." Later, as Sarah was having her weekly physical therapy session, a police cruiser pulled up outside. An officer knocked on our door claiming they had received a complaint about an illegal business being run from our home. "That's absurd," I said. "My wife is receiving physical therapy for her multiple sclerosis. We're not running a business here." The officer, after verifying the situation with Sarah's therapist, apologized for the disturbance. "This is getting out of hand," I said to Sarah once the officer left. Someone is watching our house and making false reports. Sarah's usual optimism was starting to fade. Maybe we should just join their HOA to make it stop. No, I said firmly. That's exactly what they want. They're trying to bully us into compliance. The next morning, I woke to someone pounding on the door at 6:15 a.m. Noise complaint inspection, a man in an official-looking uniform announced. What noise, I asked, still groggy. Reports of loud machinery running all night. We need to check your home for violations. I couldn't believe it. It was a ridiculous situation. The only machinery we have here is Sarah's medical equipment, which barely makes a sound, I said, my frustration rising. Sarah appeared behind me in her wheelchair, her brow furrowed in concern. What's going on, James? The inspector's eyes narrowed as he looked at Sarah's wheelchair. Is that electric? Could be the source of the noise. It's a standard motorized wheelchair, I snapped back, and we were both asleep all night, so nothing was running. He jotted something down on his clipboard. I'll need to inspect the chair. Absolutely not, I said firmly, stepping in front of Sarah. You have no right to enter our home or inspect my wife's medical equipment. Please leave. After he left, I knew we needed to start documenting everything. I quickly installed a security camera at our front door, anticipating more harassment in the future. That night, we were watching TV when suddenly the power went out. The house was pitch dark. I stood up, grabbing a flashlight. Stay here, I'll check the breaker box, I told Sarah, but when I opened the panel, all the breakers were fine. Peering out the window, I noticed that every other house on the street had their lights on. Only ours was dark. I called the power company's emergency line. We'll send someone out, the representative promised, but after a few minutes, they added, our system shows no outage at your address. 2 hours later, a utility worker arrived and inspected the meter on the side of our house. Someone tampered with your meter, he said, flipping the switch back on. This doesn't happen by accident. As he restored the power, an unsettling chill ran down my spine. Someone had deliberately cut our electricity. The next day, we received 3 more violation notices: improper garbage placement, unapproved window coverings, and something about excessive medical equipment being visible from the street. This is harassment, Sarah said, her voice trembling. They're targeting us because of my disability. I gathered all the notices, taking photos to document everything. Later that afternoon, I was mowing the lawn when Deborah Morgan walked by with 2 other women. They stopped directly in front of our house, and I overheard their conversation. Such a shame, Deborah said loudly enough for me to hear. This neighborhood used to have standards. I heard they're running some kind of medical facility, one of her companions replied. Shouldn't be allowed in a residential area. I turned off the mower. Excuse me, but we can hear you, I said, stepping toward them. If you have concerns, you should bring them to me directly. The women looked startled, but Deborah recovered quickly. We're just concerned about property values. Your situation is creating an eyesore. My situation? I asked, stepping closer. You mean my wife's disability, the wheelchair ramp, the medical vehicles, the equipment? It's not what people expect in an upscale community, Deborah replied, her tone cold. I could feel my face flush with anger. The Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act protect our right to make reasonable modifications for my wife's condition. Deeb, Deborah smiled, her gaze sharp. Laws can be interpreted many ways, and accidents tend to happen to people who don't fit in. Before I could respond, they walked off, laughing under their breath. That night, around midnight, I heard the distinct sound of engines revving outside our house. I looked out the window and saw 3 cars parked right in front of our driveway, blocking it completely. I recognized Deborah's SUV and her husband Tom's sports car, as well as a 3rd car belonging to the HOA treasurer. What if Sarah needed emergency medical care? We'd be trapped. I grabbed my phone to record the situation and stepped outside. You can't block our driveway like this, I said firmly. Tom Morgan stepped out of his car, smirking. It's a public street. We can park wherever we want. This is intentional harassment, I shot back, keeping my phone camera aimed at them. You're blocking access for a disabled person. Prove it, Deborah called from her SUV. "We're just having a late-night chat." I made a final threat. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Tom laughed. "My brother-in-law's the shift captain tonight." Eventually, they drove off, still laughing, but the message was clear. They had power here, and we didn't. Back inside, Sarah was waiting, anxiety written all over her face. "What's happening to us, James? Why do they hate us so much?" I didn't have an answer, but as I held her trembling hand, I made a promise to myself. I would not let them win. The question was, how could we fight an enemy with such deep roots and connections in this community? I woke with a start to the sound of Sarah screaming. My heart raced as I rushed to the front porch, still in my pajamas. When I saw her, frozen in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, I froze too. A thick metal chain had been wrapped tightly around her wheelchair and the porch railing, locked with a heavy padlock. "David, I can't move," Sarah sobbed, her hands trembling as she tried unsuccessfully to free herself. A bright orange paper was taped to the wheelchair. "Violation, unapproved ramp and porch modifications. Contact HOA immediately to resolve all violations. Subject to $500 daily fine." I felt a surge of anger. "Those monsters," I whispered, my blood boiling. "Don't worry, I'll get you free." I rushed to the garage for the bolt cutters, calling Sarah's name to keep her calm. Our elderly neighbor Frank shuffled over from next door, his face filled with disbelief. "What in God's name?" he gasped. "Who would do such a thing?" "The HOA," I said grimly, snapping the chain with a satisfying crack. "And I've caught it all on camera." The doorbell security camera had recorded everything. At 5:43 a.m., Deborah Morgan and two other HOA board members, Kay Henderson and Margaret Wu, had snuck onto our property, chaining Sarah's wheelchair while she was still inside. The video even showed Deborah posing for a selfie beside the trapped wheelchair before they all hurried off, laughing. "We need to call the police right now," Frank insisted, his face flushed with anger. "This is criminal." Officer Jenkins arrived 40 minutes later, but when I showed him the video, his expression shifted to one of discomfort. "Look, Mr. Taylor," he said, lowering his voice, "I understand your frustration, but—" He hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. "Say it," I demanded. "Are you saying you won't help because of who they know?" Jenkins took a step back. "I didn't say that," he said. "I'm just suggesting you try to resolve this without involving law enforcement. These neighborhood disputes can get messy." "Neighborhood dispute?" Sarah wheeled forward, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. "They physically restrained a disabled person. That's false imprisonment and a hate crime." Jenkins glanced between us, then checked his watch. "I'll file a report, but don't expect much. Maybe consider joining their HOA. It might make things easier in the long run." As the officer's patrol car drove away, I watched as our neighbors began to gather. Most looked horrified after seeing the video. Others, however, nervously excused themselves, afraid to cross the powerful HOA. "They did the same to my mother," whispered Mrs. Patel, our elderly neighbor across the street. "She had a bird feeder they didn't approve. They cut it down and left the pieces on her walkway. She fell and broke her hip. Sold her house to Deborah's brother for half its value." More stories followed. The Washingtons had their children's basketball hoop cut down. The Garces had their cultural garden ornaments smashed. All of them had refused to join the HOA and face the same treatment. Harassment until they sold and left. Frank shook his head. "Why doesn't someone fight them?" "Because Deborah's brother-in-law is Judge Wilson," another neighbor whispered quietly, "and her cousin runs the local newspaper. You can't win." That evening, as Sarah finally managed to fall into an exhausted sleep, the power went out again. I called the electric company, only to learn someone had requested the disconnection of our service due to dangerous wiring violations. "They'll restore it in 3 days unless you pay a $1,000 rush fee," they told me. Meanwhile, the refrigerator full of Sarah's medication was at risk of spoiling. As I sat in the dark, watching car headlights sweep across the walls, I saw Deborah Morgan herself stop in front of our house. Through the blinds, I saw her taking pictures of our darkened home, a satisfied smile on her face, before she drove away. I made a decision: if the system wouldn't protect us, I'd find another way. I grabbed my laptop, powered it from our car battery, and started researching everything I could about Pinecrest Gardens, the HOA, and Deborah Morgan. What I uncovered in those dark hours would turn our nightmare into something far bigger than just a battle over property rights. Because sometimes the people who think they have all the power have the most to hide, and I was about to find all their secrets. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My eyes burned as I stared at my laptop screen, using my phone as a hotspot and our car battery to power the computer. I dug through every public record I could find on Deborah Morgan and the Pinecrest Gardens. HOA. David, Sarah called weakly from the bedroom. Are you still up? I found something, I replied, my voice shaking with excitement. You need to see this. As dawn broke, Sarah wheeled herself into the living room. Without power, we had moved her medications to a neighbor's fridge, and Frank had run an extension cord to keep her medical equipment going. But the HOA had already left a violation notice on Frank's house, threatening to fine him for helping us. Look at this, I said, turning my screen toward her. I requested the HOA's financial records through a public information request. Since they're a nonprofit, they have to file tax forms. Sarah squinted at the screen. What am I looking at? Last year, they collected over $850,000 in dues and fines, but only $47,000 went toward neighborhood improvements, I explained. The rest, it went to a company called Morgan Family Holdings. That's Deborah's company, or technically her husband's. Look at what they bought: 3 vacation homes in Florida, a yacht, and they're paying themselves $250,000 salaries as HOA consultants. Sarah's face went pale. Can we prove this is illegal? It gets worse, I said, showing her another document. The HOA was never properly registered with the state. Their paperwork was rejected 5 years ago because they didn't get signatures from 30% of homeowners. They've been operating illegally this whole time. Sarah whispered, they can't enforce rules if they don't legally exist. Exactly, I said, but here's the real scam. I opened a map of the neighborhood, color-coded with properties. Red indicates homes bought before the HOA formed. Blue represents those homes that were harassed until the owners sold them, all to Morgan Development Group. We now had the evidence we needed. Devers Brothers Company, I said, the realization sinking in. They've been systematically forcing out original homeowners who never agreed to these HOA rules. Their first targets are the elderly, disabled, or financially vulnerable. They create impossible situations, then swoop in with lowball offers when people get desperate. Sarah stared at the map, counting the dots. That's over 40 homes in the last 5 years. And they've made millions flipping properties after adding superficial upgrades. I switched to a spreadsheet on my laptop. They buy properties at 30% below market value, make cosmetic improvements, and then sell them to people willing to pay a premium for an exclusive community with strong HOA protection. A car drove slowly past our house and we froze, waiting for it to pass before continuing. What can we do? Sarah asked quietly. I exhaled slowly. We could try going to the media, but Deborah's cousin owns a local newspaper and her brother-in-law is a judge. We need someone outside of their influence. Sarah wheeled herself over to the bookshelf and pulled down a dusty photo album. I might have an idea, she said softly, flipping through the pages that documented her life before multiple sclerosis changed everything. She paused on a photo I hadn't seen before, Sarah smiling, arm-linked with a familiar face. That's me with Governor Elizabeth Reynolds, she said, pointing to the photo. We were roommates in law school, best friends. I stared at the photo, stunned. You know the governor? We worked together on the Housing Rights Commission before I got sick, Sarah explained, her fingers tracing the photo. We lost touch after I was diagnosed. I was too ashamed to reach out once I couldn't work anymore. I felt a flicker of hope. Sarah, this could change everything for us. The governor could help. Just then, a rock crashed through our front window, sending glass shards flying. Sarah screamed as I pulled her away from the danger. Attached to the rock was a note. Last warning, join or leave. Outside, Deborah Morgan stood on our lawn, flanked by 5 other HOA board members. You have 48 hours to sign the membership papers or face consequences, Deborah shouted. No electricity, no water, no peace until you comply or sell. I stepped onto the porch, my phone already recording. You're breaking multiple laws right now: trespassing, vandalism, harassment. Deborah laughed. Who's going to stop us? Your friends at the police department? Good luck with that. As they walked away, Tom Morgan called back, by the way, your wheelchair ramp will be removed tomorrow. HOA regulations don't allow permanent structures without approval. When they were gone, I turned to Sarah, trembling with anger. They're going to strand you inside our house. Sarah stared at the photo of her and the governor once more, then reached for her phone. It's time to call Beth, she said quietly. I watched as Sarah dialed a number she still knew by heart. Her hand shook, but her voice was calm when someone answered. Hello, this is Sarah Taylor. I need to speak with Governor Reynolds about a housing crisis involving systematic discrimination against disabled residents. Yes, it's urgent. While Sarah waited to be connected, I noticed something odd happening outside. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows had turned onto our street, moving slowly toward our house. Were they here to help or to make things worse? Minutes later, we would find out whether our desperate gamble would save us or cost us everything. Are you sure about this? I asked Sarah as she finished her email to Governor Reynolds, detailing our ordeal with the HOA. No, she admitted, her voice quiet but resolute. But we're out of options. I paced the living room, unable to sit still. My stomach was twisted in knots. What if the governor didn't remember Sarah? What if she ignored our plea? I glanced at Sarah, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest of her wheelchair. Then the ping of an incoming email made us both jump. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice breaking. I rushed to her side, reading over her shoulder. The email confirmed Governor Reynolds not only remembered Sarah, but she wanted to meet us tomorrow at our house. This can't be real, I murmured. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. It is. Beth always kept her promises. That night, we barely slept. I kept checking the windows, worried Deborah or her minions might be watching. By morning, dark circles had formed under our eyes, but our determination had only grown stronger. At exactly 9 a.m., an unmarked black SUV pulled into our driveway. 2 men in suits scanned our property before a woman stepped out. Governor Elizabeth Reynolds herself. Dressed casually to avoid attention. Sarah Taylor, she said, embracing Sarah with genuine warmth. I've missed you. For the next hour, we showed the governor everything: videos of the wheelchair chaining, copies of the fake violation notices, photos of HOA members blocking our driveway, and all the evidence of harassment. This isn't just mean-spirited, Governor Reynolds said, her face darkening as she reviewed our documents. This is criminal. She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones. Within 30 minutes, 2 plainclothes state investigators arrived, followed by a tech team. We've been building a case against corrupt housing authorities for months, the governor explained. Your situation could break it wide open, but we need solid evidence that they're breaking the law. Caught in the act. One of the investigators spread out a map of our neighborhood. We think they're targeting specific homes to force sales, then flipping the properties through shell companies. That matches what I found, I said, pulling out my own research. Deborah's brother's company has bought 6 homes in the last year, all from elderly or disabled residents who faced HOA harassment. The tech team quietly installed tiny cameras around our property, in the porch light, under the eaves, disguised as ordinary fixtures. Inside, they set up recording equipment to document any illegal entry. Now we need bait, the lead investigator said, something that will make them show their hand. Sarah wheeled forward, her eyes bright with an idea. What if I publicly resigned from my position on the Housing Commission. I stared at her in confusion. What Housing Commission position? The governor smiled, a slow, calculating expression. The one I'm appointing her to right now. Within hours, a press release announced Sarah's appointment to the State Housing Rights Commission, with her official acceptance ceremony scheduled for next week. They'll panic, Sarah explained. If I have that kind of power, their whole operation is at risk. But why would you resign? I asked, still confused. I won't, Sarah said, her voice steady. But I'll leak that I'm considering it due to personal issues at my residence. The governor nodded. They'll either back off completely or they'll try something desperate to force us out before she can use her position against them. Isn't that dangerous? I asked, suddenly afraid. That's why we're not leaving you unprotected, the governor assured me. Starting now, my security team will monitor everything remotely, and we're installing panic buttons throughout your house. As evening fell, the final piece of our plan fell into place. A formal letter to the HOA printed on official state letterhead, stating that we were considering options regarding recent accessibility violations and harassment. It would be sent by certified mail the next morning. Make sure Deborah has to sign for it personally, the investigator instructed. That night, as the security team left and the governor's SUV disappeared down the street, I helped Sarah into bed. What if this doesn't work? I whispered in the darkness. Sarah reached for my hand. It has to, she said softly, because if it doesn't, how many other families will suffer like we have? I lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep, jumping at every sound outside our windows, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would Deborah take the bait, or had we just painted an even bigger target on our backs? The next morning, I woke to the sound of car doors slamming. Grabbing my phone, I rushed to the window. 3 black SUVs were blocking our driveway. My heart pounded as I saw Deborah marching up our path with 5 men in suits. One carried a toolbox. Sarah, I whispered urgently, helping my wife into her wheelchair. They're here. Sarah's face showed no fear, only fierce determination. Start recording, she said, pressing the panic button hidden under her armrest. The doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. I checked the camera feed on my phone. Everything was working. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door, keeping the security chain on. What do you want? I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Deborah's smile was cold. Emergency inspection. We've received reports of unauthorized modifications endangering the community. She thrust a paper through the crack in the door. I pretended to read it, buying time while our emergency signal reached the governor's team. This isn't legal, I said. You need proper notice for any inspection. Tom stepped forward. The HOA agreement gives us emergency access rights. Open this door now, or we'll consider it a violation of community guideline. The locksmith nervously shuffled behind them. Ma'am, I'm not comfortable with this. Shut up and do your job, Deborah snapped. We have authority here. I closed the door and reattached the chain, buying precious seconds. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, Deborah laughed. Chief Morgan is my brother-in-law. Who do you think will respond? Sarah wheeled up beside me, her voice changing to something clear and authoritative. Let me handle this. She reopened the door, positioning herself in full view. Deborah Morgan, you're currently committing attempted breaking and entering. Every word and action is being recorded. I advise you to step away from my property immediately. Deborah's eyes narrowed. How dare you threaten me? Your little appointment won't save you. By the time your precious ceremony happens next week, you won't even be living here anymore. So you've been monitoring my professional activities? Sarah asked, baiting her expertly. Everyone knows, Deborah spat. You think your government connections scare us? We run this community, not some pity appointment. Tom stepped forward, putting his foot in the door. Enough talking. We're coming in to inspect. And then you're going to sign these papers. Tom held up a stack of documents, his hand steady. Transfer of property at fair market value, take it, or things will get worse. Are you threatening us? I asked, my phone clearly recording the interaction. Call it whatever you want, Tom growled. Nobody says no to the Pinecrest Gardens Oversight Committee. The locksmith stepped back, shaking his head. I didn't sign up for this. This is illegal, I said firmly. Shut up, Deborah snapped, turning on him. You'll do exactly what we pay you for. She grabbed his tools from him and shoved them back into his hands, pushing him toward the door. Open it now, or your business with the city ends tomorrow. The locksmith looked like a man caught in a trap, sweat pouring down his face. His hand shook as he moved toward the lock. I braced myself against the door, my body tense as Tom pushed harder. The security chain strained, threatening to snap. Sarah wheeled herself back, pressing a hidden button from her bedroom. A piercing alarm blared, making the locksmith jump back, but Deborah just smirked. Amateur theatrics won't save you, she said coldly. Tom, break it down. Tom stepped back, getting ready to ram the door with his shoulder. I moved aside, following our planned protocol, giving them enough rope to hang themselves. With a loud crash, the door burst open, the chain snapping. Tom stumbled in, followed immediately by Deborah and 2 other board members. The locksmith stayed outside, his face a picture of horror. That's breaking and entering, Sarah said calmly, her phone still recording. Would you like to add assault to your charges? Save your legal talk, Deborah sneered, pulling papers from her briefcase. Sign these now, or next time it won't just be your wheelchair we chain up. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Deborah's smile faltered and she looked out the window. What's happening? Tom muttered, moving toward the window. Blue and red lights flashed as not 1 but 6 police cruisers screeched to a halt outside our house. Behind them, an unmarked black SUV rolled up. What the hell? Deborah whispered, her confident facade cracking. Through our open door, we saw state troopers, not local police, approaching with weapons drawn. Police! Everyone on the ground! A voice boomed through a megaphone. Tom bolted for the back door but froze when 2 officers appeared in our kitchen. Within moments, our living room was filled with law enforcement. Deborah and her team were forced to the ground and handcuffed. What's going on? Deborah shrieked. Do you know who my brother-in-law is? Yes, Mrs. Morgan, said a stern-faced woman in a suit as she entered. We're quite familiar with Chief Morgan. She flashed her badge. He's currently being questioned about his involvement in this matter. I'm with the State Attorney General's office. We've been investigating your HOA activities for months. Deborah's face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. We have rights. Rights like the ones you respect for disabled homeowners? Sarah asked quietly, her voice unwavering. The final blow came when another car pulled up. Governor Reynolds herself stepped out, flanked by security. Deborah's jaw dropped as the governor walked straight to Sarah, clasping her hand warmly. Perfect timing as always, Sarah said with a smile. I wish I could have gotten here sooner, Governor Reynolds replied, then turned to Deborah, who was still on the floor, handcuffed. Deborah Morgan, she said, her voice calm but firm. I believe we need to talk about your systematic harassment campaign against vulnerable homeowners, starting with my former law school roommate and dear friend. Sarah's just your... What? Deborah stammered, looking back and forth between Sarah and the governor. Before her MS diagnosis, Sarah was the state's top housing rights attorney, Governor Reynolds explained. We've worked together for years, and as for your operation here, we've been building a case against you and your associates for months. As officers led Deborah and her team away, I caught her final venomous glare at Sarah, but for the first time since we met her, there was fear in Deborah's eyes. The governor turned to Sarah. Ready to make housing history again, counselor? Sarah looked up at her old friend, tears brimming in her eyes. More ready than you know. I stood in the doorway, watching as police cars drove away, wondering how many other victims of Deborah's scheme were about to get justice. More importantly, would this be enough to finally put an end to the reign of corrupt HOAs that preyed on the vulnerable across our state? Cameras flashed as Deborah was led away in handcuffs, her once perfect makeup streaked with tears. You regret this, she screamed at Sarah. Do you know who my husband is? Governor Reynolds stepped between them. I know exactly who he is, Mrs. Morgan, and he's next. I watched in amazement as news vans lined our street, reporters thrusting microphones toward us, eager for details about the HOA that had chained a disabled woman to her porch The story spread like wildfire. "They want a statement," I whispered to Sarah, squeezing her hand. My brave wife wheeled forward, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Today isn't just about what happened to me. 17 families were bullied by these people because of their age or disability. That stops now." The investigation moved swiftly. FBI agents discovered offshore accounts holding over $2 million in stolen HOA fees. They found that Deborah's brother had bought 8 properties from elderly residents who had sold after strange accidents damaged their homes. 3 days later, Tom Morgan was escorted from the police station, his badge and gun taken away. His fellow officers wouldn't even look him in the eye as he passed. "My uncle is a lawyer," whispered our neighbor Ellie, who had been too afraid to help us before. "He says they could face up to 15 years in prison." Our phone rang constantly with calls from other victims: an elderly man who had found dead animals in his yard after refusing to sell, a deaf couple whose fire alarms were tampered with, a veteran with PTSD who had found threatening notes calling him damaged goods. "We should help them all," Sarah said one night, determination burning in her eyes. A month later, we sat in Governor Reynolds' office as she signed Executive Order 438, freezing all HOA fees statewide pending investigation. "It's a start," she told Sarah, "but we need stronger laws." Sarah nodded. "I want to help write them." The governor smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." I never expected my quiet wife to become the face of a movement, but there she was on television, rolling through the halls of the state capitol, meeting with lawmakers. Her MS sometimes left her exhausted, but nothing stopped her fierce drive for justice. Months passed. Deborah and 5 other HOA board members pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The judge showed no mercy. "You preyed on those you saw as weak," he told them. 8 years, minimum, no parole. "Did you see Deborah's face?" Sarah asked me later. "She still can't believe I had the power to fight back." The new law was bold. No HOA could form without unanimous consent from all homeowners. Existing HOAs would face strict oversight, with criminal penalties for discrimination against disabled or elderly residents. "They're calling it the Sarah Taylor Act," the governor told us at the signing ceremony. As rain fell gently that evening, we returned home. Our neighborhood looked different now. Rainbow flags and disability pride symbols appeared in windows. People waved and smiled as we passed. A moving truck stood across the street, and a young couple was helping their daughter, maybe 8 years old, maneuver her wheelchair down a ramp. "Welcome to Pinecrest Gardens," Sarah called, rolling toward them. The girl's face lit up when she saw another wheelchair user. "You live here too?" "I do," Sarah smiled, "and you're going to love it here." Later that night, I found Sarah looking at old pictures from before her diagnosis. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I asked softly. She closed the album. "I wish I hadn't been chained to our porch, but look what came from it." She paused. "Sometimes your biggest challenge reveals your greatest strength." The next morning, a letter arrived from the state bar. They wanted Sarah to lead a new committee on disability rights law. "What do you think?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I kissed her forehead. "I think Deborah Morgan made the biggest mistake of her life when she decided to mess with my wife." Who would have thought that our quiet life would transform into a battle that would protect thousands of vulnerable homeowners across the state?